Welcome to Uncaged. Today we're speaking with Richard Bacon. Now, Richard is the head of sales and business development at Shard Capital. Shard Capital has evolved into an organization of over 80 professionals. It focuses on providing core custody and dealing services with linked investment management and broking offerings. They also act as an alternative investment fund manager for small to medium-sized enterprises. They offer seed stage tech funding focused on augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things. We're going to cover a lot of interesting topics today for sure, but clearly this is an institutional fixed income broker, and they're supporting individuals and groups with investment. And so we'll talk to Richard about the evolution of that business and really where they are today. But before we get there, Richard, tell us a little bit about you and your career.
Yeah, sure, man. So, I've been at Shard. It will have been 3 years in August of this year. So, a little over 3 years.
I'd say the last 3 years, Richard, are almost like what do they say, like dog years, right? So you've been there
Absolutely,
a long time.
absolutely. Well, it's funny you should say that because I was, by virtue of the timescale, I was a COVID recruit, and I was an employee of the company for a long period of time without ever visiting our office, and I'd only physically met about 4 people. So it was a slow start, but I'm certainly not alone in that. I know a lot of people had a similar experience. Yeah, prior to that, I've had about 20 years, give or take, in financial services in various capacities. I started my career in investment businesses, investment houses, initially at a very sort of UK retail business called Jupiter Asset Management. I had about 12 years there. I had about 2.5 years after that with PIMCO, which is obviously a titan of the asset management industry, and very pleasing to have their sort of brand name and strength behind you when you're knocking on doors. But yeah, as I say, it's been a period of time pretty dedicated to business development, sales, early on, and in the majority, I should say, of my career, that was selling investments to various clients, selling investment funds to various clients. Shard marked a little bit of a change of tack for me career-wise, in that I joined a business that would have previously been a client of mine, if I can put it in those terms. So we were a buyer of those investment vehicles and those funds. But it's been a great experience, good group of people, a much smaller business than I was used to previously, and yeah, we've made great progress.
So tell me a little bit more about Shard and really, what you're working on specifically there.
Yeah, sure. Do you know we're probably quite unusual, Ben, in that relative to the size of our firm, I think we are unusually diversified in what we do. And that has a little bit to do with the legacy of our business and how we got from the starting point to where we are today. Our business is about 12 years old. It's a privately owned firm. It's owned and founded by James Lewis. And James came from a corporate broking background. And in the sort of first 5 years of the firm's evolution, it was a sort of situation where every time someone knocked on James's door and said, "I've got a quite interesting financial business that does X, Y, Z. Can I come and operate under Shard's umbrella?"
Yeah.
He cut them a deal, and in they came. So, as I say, we are quite diverse, as you described in the intro, which made us sound very, very grand. But we have a very mature institutional business, if I can put it that way, sort of B2B business. And a lot of the activities you described fit very neatly into that. But the vision for the future of the firm is certainly very much based towards private client investment management, private client wealth management. And it comes as no surprise. The broking side is very much famine and feast, and the revenue line for the business has that volatility, if I can put it that way. I think all businesses crave a nice linear annuity-like revenue stream, and private client business is certainly something that we're very focused on going forward, and plays most closely to my previous experience. And I would say, although my responsibilities at the firm stretch across everything that we do, 70% of my time is really focused on building our private client business and our investment management service around that.
Let's talk a little bit about that private client management element. I mean, here we are in an interesting moment economically, not only in the UK, but globally. I think that presents probably challenges, but also probably opportunities for your customers. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing out there right now, and what individuals and customers are most interested in.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things that has become increasingly apparent over that 20 years is that nothing stands still in our industry. And I know we're not unique in that way, but we are inherently dealing with a constantly evolving backdrop in terms of managing money and working in investment markets. They are, by their very nature, never still. But I also think when you add into that, you just have this sort of constant wave of regulation trying to improve client outcomes and enhance how we go about applying our business. So, at no point is the playing surface sort of level and stable and still for too long. But without dodging your question, it's a really unique time. I don't want to sound
Yeah.
too dramatic in answering it, but ever since the previous financial crisis, we've been through this 10-12 year period of completely unique, distorted, alien market conditions. And it is amazing how short-term people's memories are. And we've built so many investment solutions as an industry that have been completely well suited to that very, very specific time frame and very, very specific environment. But I firmly believe, Shard firmly believes, that in the last 2 years, that economic era has finished. A new one has begun. Inflation has returned. Interest rates have gone higher. Couple into that geopolitical uncertainty, conflict, weather systems, whatever it may be. I think the 10 years that we're about to advance into look incredibly different to the 10 or 12 years that we're just leaving behind us. And people are going to need a very, very different approach to managing their money in that situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, we're all thinking about things like, how is inflation going to impact us? What the public markets are actually going to do, whether they're going to grow, depending on the hour of when I look at what's happening in the US economy, I'm optimistic or extremely concerned. So it really is a wild one. So clearly it's a moment where individuals and companies need a lot of guidance, which I'm sure that's where you and your team come in. But tell me a little bit, Richard, about yourself again. I mean, you've been working in the finance industry for your career. I mean, what drew you to this? I'm always kind of trying to understand, what is it that gets you up in the morning to keep doing this stuff?
Do you know, but I don't know if it will make the edit, but the honest answer to the question is, if I'm genuinely serious with you, is when I sat down at school and I was a student, I was never hugely excited about the prospect of having to spend my life working. So,
That's great. Yeah.
so my view was always, well, okay, let's try and find something that is quite well remunerated, but it's not also cold-hearted as that. I think actually, we do have a service and a job to do, and it's always surprised me, particularly lately in financial services, and how much end investors, end clients how they value the service you provide. And I sort of sit there and think, most of us get up every day, we go to work, we try and earn money to support our families, ourselves, and guide us through our lives.
Hmm.
Um, and when we think about cars and holidays and clothes, most, not all, but most people aspire to be to have better, to
Hmm.
have higher value items. And
Hmm.
then when it almost comes to our most prized possession, which is our money and the thing we dedicate most of our working weeks to during our lives, sometimes people just think, oh, I want the cheapest option available. And that always seems like slightly ironic, slightly misplaced. So there's a challenge there. It's an industry where the proof is in the pudding, as we say here, right? There's nowhere to hide. We, within clients' risk appetites, are trying to dedicate our time and attention to achieving them the very, very best results that we can. There is no split agenda. There is no distraction. That is our day-to-day goal. And hey, the numbers will tell you whether we are achieving that job consistently or whether we're not. And
Yeah.
that, of course, is net of what you're paying us, right?
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's an interesting thought on why we enter what we do. I actually did my A levels in England, and I also went to university in England. And I think the one thing that struck me that was a difference between the British system and the American system is that in England, you kind of go down a pre-professional path pretty early, as a kid. I mean, you kind of have to focus. A lot of people don't even do A levels, as you know, right? So people are kind of like down studying one subject for university pretty quickly. And that feeling you had growing up, going like, I don't know if I want to do this. It's a tricky one, right? I think it's hard to know what you want to do when we're all kids. But I mean, I echo what you're saying. There's probably few things that are more important than getting sound financial advice for any individual. Making sure that that's something that people dedicate a little bit of time to is absolutely critical. And especially right now, I mean, here we are, we're about to go into 2024. It appears to be a year that is going to be very interesting for everyone. We have the Olympics happening, we've got the US elections happening. I mean, there is a lot of things that could impact the world quite dramatically. And also, we still have a world where we have high inflation rates, obviously, global conflicts. What are you and your team thinking about for next year in terms of the guidance that you're giving folks?
Yeah, I don't want to oversimplify it because, as you just explained, I don't think it's very easy to be overly dramatic and
Hmm.
be pessimistic. I think naturally maybe financial markets and people in financial investment roles can tend to sort of overvalue the negative and undervalue
Hmm.
the positive. But the reality is just as you described, right? We're on the threshold of this new calendar year. Sadly, unfortunately, the list of things to worry about is pretty big,
Hmm.
and it doesn't show any real sign of improving dramatically anytime soon.
Hmm.
So my the main feeling I have is, and I'm sorry to keep sort of harking back to the same old story, but we've had this 10 or 12-year period where pretty much you couldn't lose in an investment context. Whether
Right.
it was your investment portfolio, whether it was your classic car, whether it was your wine collection, whatever it may be, if you're fortunate enough to have any of those things, whether it was the value of your home,
Right.
whatever, everything pretty much rose on the tide. Yeah. So
Right.
in that environment, where it's very hard to differentiate yourself from one investment business to another, the primary sort of battleground became price. And it's what's the headline fee I'm going to charge you as a client? And that became the sort of commercial message and the reality. Well,
Hmm.
as I said a few moments ago, that era's over.
Gone. Yeah.
And what as if you want to reach your financial goals long term as a client, you now need to think about being an investment strategy with an investment manager that can trade and use the market volatility to your advantage.
Right.
If in concise terms, if the future that we're walking into is one of low returns with higher volatility, you can't leave the market to do the hard work for you. You've got
Right.
to employ someone to try and capture the best and mitigate and protect your capital on the downside. So, and of course that costs more.
It's really interesting what you're saying, actually. I mean, I think what you're saying is that we've lived through this phase where everyone should win in some form or fashion. And maybe
Yeah.
we won't have all winners now. It's going to be a bit of a shift. Well, I'm hoping that they call you, Richard, and your team. With that in mind, if they wanted to reach out, tell me a little bit about where's the best place to reach you.
Yeah, sure. So, look, we'd love to hear from anybody that we would like to know more about us and what we do. And we sort of joke internally that we like to be the worst, best kept secret. So, we're not a massive business. We're not a national presence here in the UK. We have a business associated with us called Leafbridge, which is for US expats actually that are residing here in the UK with their tax complexities that surround that. We have satellite offices in the Channel Islands, in Dublin, and actually one in Singapore as well. So without downplaying us too much, we have an international presence of sorts, but our core market is certainly here in the UK. People are very, very welcome to drop me a line at richard.bacon@shardcapital.com, and I'd be delighted to hear from you.
Well, Richard, it's been great chatting with you today. We've been speaking with Richard Bacon. He's the head of sales and business development at Shard Capital. Shard Capital was founded in 2010 as an institutional fixed income broker. They've evolved and grown. They've got more than 80 professionals focused on providing core custody and dealing services with linked investment management and broking offerings. These business areas are distinct from each other, but they also have an alternative investment fund for small to medium-sized enterprises, direct lending funds, and a seed stage tech fund. You guys are doing some pretty exciting stuff. Richard, thank you so much for being on the show today, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you very much, Ben. I've enjoyed it.